Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Mohammed. I work as the Community Communications Manager for Wikibase at Wikimedia Germany. I'm based in Berlin. And with me to talk about Wikibase is my colleague, Georgina. Georgina takes care of all of the partnerships on the Wikibase team at Wikimedia Germany. And our presentation is about Wikibase as a free and collaborative knowledge base to connect and collaborate around structured data. Before we go into the presentation, a little bit about Wikimedia Germany as an organization. We are a Wikimedia Foundation affiliate that was founded in 2004, sorry. And aside from being one of the oldest affiliates, Wikimedia Germany is also one of the largest chapters in the Wikimedia movement, currently with over 140 employees. And our mission basically is to provide more people with more access to more knowledge. Wikimedia Germany has a department dedicated to software development. The development of Wikidata started at Wikimedia Germany, and till date, Wikidata remains the primary products, the primary software products that we develop and maintain. In the past few years, we started actively working on Wikibase as a separate product. And that is what we are going to be talking about in this presentation. So, we basically cannot talk about Wikibase without giving an overview of Wikidata first. That is how connected these two products are. So how did it all start? What is Wikidata? Wikidata is a sister project of Wikipedia. It was launched in 2012 and is actually one of the youngest of the Wikimedia projects, although one of the largest actually. Wikidata is a free knowledge base that contains structured data based on facts and references that anyone can edit and reuse. Wikidata is linked to other databases via IDs called external identifiers. And those databases could also be linked to other databases and even linked back to Wikidata. And when these databases are open as Wikidata is, then we call that data network linked open data. Wikidata, so the data in Wikidata is released under CC0 license. That means that Wikidata's data is in the public domain and has no exclusive intellectual property rights applied to it. Wikidata is made for humans and machines and is available for anyone's use, whether on other Wikimedia projects or outside of it. Wikidata is part of the Wikimedia projects, and like all of its sister projects, Wikidata is multilingual, and so it has no language barriers at all. And on the wikidata.org, on Wikidata's landing page, you can get a quick overview of how to get started in Wikidata, how you can get up to speed with the fundamentals, you know, and just about how to get involved in the Wikidata community. So you can check it out. All right. Now, how is the data on Wikidata modeled? So on Wikidata, things are modeled based on triples. The three different parts of a triple make up statements. So here there's an item identifier, which has a QID K19526. And there's a property instance of, and a value, which is human. So each statement at an item page links to a property and assigns it some value, a particular value. Now, a triple can be read like a sentence in plain language as a statement containing a subject, predicates, and an object. So in this example, we have Maya Angelou is an instance of a human. Aside from the basic triple model, we can also add extra details to contextualize Wikidata statements. And what do I mean by that? So we can do this by adding qualifiers and references to statements. Qualifiers allow statements to be expanded on, annotated, well beyond what can be expressed in the basic statement. So as an example, the statement, Maya Angelou award received, National Women's Hall of Fame, we can add a simple property value per point in time, 1998, to sort of add a bit of context to when this award was received. Then we may also add a reference or as many references as we want to point to specific sources that back up the data provided in the statement. After all, Wikidata statements should be supported by some verifiable source of information. Now, the last part of the Wikidata triple are the values. So in this slide, we have 4 different statements. For example, Maya Angelou place of birth, Ben St. Louis, or Maya Angelou award received, Ben the National Women's Hall of Fame, and so on. Now, these values themselves are items with their own QIDs. So that means that they also have their own statements that describe them, these items. And that makes it possible to link, makes it possible for item A to be linked to item B and C and so on. But not all values at the end of a triple are items though. For example, date of births or quantitative values wouldn't necessarily be items. They would basically be strings or some other data, form in Wikidata. Now, Wikidata has more than 95 million items as we speak, covering all sorts of knowledge. And we know that people reuse Wikidata's data in so many different ways. One of the most popular ways people use Wikidata is to query Wikidata's knowledge base using a tool called the Wikidata Query Service. The query service is basically a Sparkle endpoint, Sparkle being the language where you can basically ask questions to Wikidata and get a list or some visualization as a result. I will show a few examples in the next slides. Here, we have a map generated by the Wikidata Query Service that shows airports of the world that are named after a person. And even more interesting, the color of the dots represents the gender of the person. On the left is a bubble chart of causes of death of members of noble families. Or you can even have a bubble chart like on the right that has the occupation of accused witches. And yes, in case you were thinking, that kind of data does exist on Wikidata. And finally, here is an example of paintings depicting maps by the Dutch painter Vermeer. So then, what is Wikibase? Wikibase is the software that powers Wikidata, basically. So technically, Wikibase is a set of extensions that turns the MediaWiki software into this database for structured data. And the best Wikibase example out there is Wikidata. That is the most common one that people know about. Wikibase was developed by Wikimedia Germany, like I mentioned earlier, in 2012, primarily to power Wikidata. And then after a while, people started to come to us and ask, can we run our own thing? Can we have our own little Wikidata? And then that was how Wikibase as a product started, to cut a long story short. So once Wikimedia Deutschland made that possible and opened up the software, people could now use it and install a copy of Wikibase by themselves. With all of the features of Wikidata that we described earlier, ideally, any Wikibase out there has access to the same features. Users can create and manage their own linked open knowledge base and also because Wikidata is so flexible, users can build their own data model that suits their particular needs. And if they have a community of users, then people can access it and update the data. And of course, users can query the knowledge base using Sparkle in the query service, tool. Wikibase is not the only knowledge-based software out there. Okay, but what Wikibase is really good at is the fact that its data model is not imposed. It's very flexible. Once you install a Wikibase from scratch, you can develop your own ontologies so that they are basically there are no limits to what you can do. It is yours, you can do whatever you want with it. In Wikibase, you can connect items to other databases using the external identifier property. If that is what you call your property on your own Wikibase, but on Wikidata, we call them external identifiers. With Wikibase, the fun part is that it is collaborative. So anyone with the right access can go and add or change the data on it. It is, of course, machine readable. That means it's easier to integrate third-party tools with it. Third-party tools can connect much easier with it, and you can do so much more, like bulk uploads or visualizations, just pulling from the data from your Wikibase. And then finally, allowing multilingual labeling in Wikibase makes it easier for people who understand or write in different languages to be able to work together on the same project. Over the last few years, Wikibase has started to gradually develop on its own as a separate product from Wikidata. We at Wikimedia Germany, we are really excited that people and organizations and companies can now run their own little Wikidatas, which we call Wikibase instances. And they can get to manage structured data on their own using the Wikibase software. It is a really exciting development. And just allowing Wikibase instances to exist in the wild is important because, in part, first of all, not everything can fit onto Wikidata. Wikidata's goal is to serve as this general knowledge base for the world at large. But what Wikidata isn't aiming to become is a repository of all kinds of knowledge. Also, I think some people, prefer to have a bit more control over the data that they work on. And so it just feels right to give people the control to host the data that they care about. This growing community of Wikibase users, plus all the Wikibase instances out there, is what we call the Wikibase ecosystem. And this ecosystem, we envision that individual Wikibase instances that publish specialized data would be connected between themselves and then back to Wikidata. whereby they will be able to transfer and share information between themselves in a process called federation. And when federation is fully achieved, which we are currently working on in different stages, when federation is fully achieved, it will become possible to sort of access the entities of one Wikibase repository from another Wikibase repository, with the goal of broadening the base of available data in this Wikibase ecosystem. With that, I'll pass it on to Georgina to talk some more about some of the interesting Wikibase use cases that we know of out there. So over to you, George.
So after hearing Mohammed talk about what Wikibase is, how it relates to the Wikimedia project Wikidata, and also the kind of history of how they came to be the projects that they are today, I wanted to talk in a bit more detail about Wikibase and give you some examples of what it can look like in action. So basically external projects that are using Wikibase within their own context and how they're doing it. So I'm going to talk about 3 examples today. The first one is enslaved.org. This is a project that contains it's an open database, contains open data about covering the history of the transatlantic slave trade. And what they're really doing here is using Wikibase as a linking and reconciliation hub, having had kind of a number of separate scholarly databases which covered or collected data about this part of the history of the world. They've now put it into a Wikibase instance, which they've called enslaved.org, where all of this information is, instead of being in different databases, is collected in one place. What that means is they ultimately have a Wikibase instance that has over 850,000 records about the peoples, events, places, and sources that has been gathered through the historical research of those involved. And it continues to grow this database as well. A second example is Rhizome. This is an art organization based in New York, and they were really one of the early adopters of Wikibase. You can see that also in the time. In 2015, they already started using Wikibase. Wikidata was only a project that was started in 2012, so only a few years later, they realized kind of the value of Wikibase as a software suite and started using it in their own context. And what they're using it for is really to have a place to archive their born digital art collection. They do a lot of digital preservation activities. And for them, what was really kind of advantageous or attractive about using Wikibase relates to one of the kind of advantages that Mohammed spoke about earlier, and that's the flexible model of Wikibase. What this really means is that Rhizome, or a project like Rhizome, can create items and properties that really suit their data collection. In this case, it's born digital art that they're modeling, and the flexible data model really means that they can create properties, for instance, that really suit born digital art, but of course this can really be any kind of data collection. This is also a picture of the main page of their Wikibase instance with their logo and everything. A third project is FactGrid. This is a project run by the Goethe Research Center and hosted by the University of Erfurt. It started originally as a project to document the history of the Illuminati, but it's now kind of turned into a more broad and a more kind of holistic historical database covering all types or all times and types of different historical research. It's used by historians, so historians add to it, but they also make use of the data that's been added by other historians. And it's really a place where historians can come, but it's also all publicly available as well. So these are some examples of how Wikibase is being used. It's only 3 of them, but I just wanted to give you kind of a good first understanding of some existing projects that are out there. Maybe this also spurs you to go and have a look into them in more detail yourself. The other thing we wanted to do was really give you the ability after this session to start thinking about if you were to embark on some kind of Wikibase project of your own, or if you really see a use case for Wikibase within your own institutional or project setting, then we wanted to give you some information on how to get started with Wikibase. So that's what I'll do now. So with that, let's start talking about how to get started with Wikibase. Setting up your own Wikibase instance. Getting started really depends on your needs. Are you interested in creating a sandbox instance where you can just try out a bit and play around, or are you planning a production installation? Whatever you're doing, if you're really interested in having Wikibase on your own hardware, there are a few different options on how to move forward. One is to use our versatile and popular solution, which is the Docker images, which were lovingly put together by our developers. There are detailed instructions on how to set up a Wikibase instance using Docker. But the first thing you need to do is to install Docker on the computer or hardware where you want to run your Wikibase instance. Then you can go to our the place where we basically collect all documentation for Wikibase, and this is on mediawiki.org. And here you'll really find step-by-step instructions that were put together by our technical writer for you. Once your Wikibase instance is up and running, you can add additional functionality through extensions and templates. Again, our technical writer has put some documentation on all of this together so that to make this a bit easier for those doing this. And again, you can find this at mediawiki.org. So there's lots of information on maintaining, extending, importing, and federating your Wikibase instance once it's up and running. Presumably you want some data in your Wikibase instance, and there's a few different ways to go about doing this. You may be interested in manually adding items and properties to your Wikibase instance. This is a screenshot from my Wikibase instance. You can see that on the left-hand side, lower down where the arrow is, you have the option to add new properties and items. You just click on those, and then you follow the steps, adding the additional detail, for instance, the name of the property and the data type. And as you go along, you can do this all manually for all of the different items and properties that you want in your Wikibase instance. This is really a good way to go if you don't have a huge amount of data. But of course, if you do have a large amount of data, I'm sure you're thinking, how can I then bulk import? Bulk import is a bit more complicated. There's actually no integrated bulk import tool for Wikibase that currently exists. This is definitely a pain point for Wikibase users, and it's definitely something that we're aware of and wanting to work on in the future. But there are a number of existing community tools, so built tools that were built by community members. Some of them are listed here, for instance, quick statements. Those of you who are familiar with Wikidata might have heard of quick statements. There's also Wikibase import, Wikibase integrator, and the latest version of OpenRefine. Documentation on these is also on mediawiki.org, but as I mentioned, these are really tools that are built by community members outside of our software development department. And these tools are also maintained by those community members. So you'll really find perhaps documentation in places outside of our mediawiki.org documentation pages. There are also other options. So if you are interested in having a sandbox instance to look into WBStack and explore whether it really is an option for you and whether it's something you'd really like to invest in, then you can use WBStack. This is a free hosted Wikibase service. It was originally developed by one of our engineers, but it really in his free time and with his volunteer hat on. And what it is a great way to quickly spin up a sandbox Wikibase instance. This might be of interest to you, for instance, if you're really interested in exploring Wikibase, whether it suits your needs, whether it's really something worth investing in. And how you can sign up is you can either reach out to us, and the email address for us will be in these slides as well. Or you can go to the WBStack website, and there's instructions there on how to get an invitation code. Then there's the Wikibase community. So once you have your Wikibase instance set up, or even during the process of setting one up, or as soon as you decide to get involved in Wikibase, then there's a way to join this growing Wikibase community that surrounds the project. There are a number of ways to join the community. There's a number of different kind of avenues of ways that you can connect with other community members. One is the Wikibase community user group. Another is the mailing list. The Telegram channel is also a lot of conversations that happen there as well. It's a good place, for instance, to sometimes get some of your questions or queries answered. And of course, the monthly live sessions. These are also these are live calls where people come and ask questions and just discuss the different Wikibase projects that they're working on. Further support can also be found in 2 other places that I've listed here, namely the FAQ. This is, again, on the MediaWiki.org documentation pages. There's a page that has an FAQ about different questions that commonly come up when people are thinking about or exploring Wikibase. And then, of course, there's a directory for third-party support. If you're a project that are interested in using Wikibase and have perhaps some funding or would like to look into getting some kind of consultant to help you set up your Wikibase instance, then this is a good place to look for that kind of support. So people who have expertise in Wikibase can link or list their data there and their contact details and some information about the kind of services they provide, and you can get in contact with them. So with all that said, we'd really love to try and answer some of your questions. The other thing is, this is the email address that I was referencing. Please do reach out to us if you're looking for a WB stat code or if you have any further questions that are not answered in the course of this session.